When the wind stops and the sea is quiet, is that the moment when Dasein first manifests? Both Plato and Aristotle make reference to the Egyptian priests who first made developments in mathematics. So far as I understand it, especially in geometry, which was then later taken up by the Pythagoreans, and Aristotle says Plato was a Pythagorean. Plato seems to be of the view that philosophy began through the contemplation of the stars. There's a great connection between contemplation of the stars, geometry, and mathematical calculation. The wind settles down, there's some calm, we're no longer have to concern ourselves with the drudgery of making a living, nor with beast and harsh external conditions. And then, is this the moment when the Vorhandenheit presence first shows itself? In other words, the spell of animal captivation, the domination of the environment over being, but environment doesn't only mean the inclemency of the weather, the coldness of the sea, a wolf in the forest. It also means the urban environment and the all the various pressures and absorptions of life. This moment of the priest in some way corresponds to the standing and the shadows of the houses, and talking, mere presence. It troubled me quite a bit listening to the discussion between Yuk Hoi and Alexander Dugin recently. Yuk Hoi, Y-U-K space H-U-I. The discussion was quite provocative, but it also gave me the feeling that Dugin, who I think is, his thinking should not be discounted on this basis, but I believe that he does not have any grasp of what Heidegger has meant by Dasein, but rather he has used Dasein as an anthropological conception in his own thinking. His accusation that Heidegger is a racist must be stood next to the large number of comments that Heidegger himself has made, including one in the book The History of Being, where he explicitly speaks of the concern that German Dasein must have for the free development of the Russian Dasein. He certainly speaks of many Dasein, which Dugin claims has been discredited by a conversation he has on, which is available on YouTube, with a student of Heidegger's, a German philosopher, where he says, and Heidegger denies that Dasein can be understood as a free universal essence or concept, allowing for a great ambivalence between the essence and concept and other notions. There's some truth to that, but then I wonder if Dugin is simply, as it were, insulted by the claim that he, if he is not to admit himself as a Westerner and part of the Western dispensation, cannot participate in Dasein, which Heidegger claims to be the highest development of Western thought. Heidegger does claim that, and he does make a distinction between Western and Eastern thought, especially on the basis of understanding a specific demarcation between Dasein and everything else, all other beings. I believe that Dasein, in the simplest sense, we can say means, on the one hand, there is the Vorhandenheit, and on the other hand, there is the Zuhandenheit. So, and in somewhat more dramatic language, we can say absolute captivation on the one side, and on the other side, cool apprehension. Involvement on the one side and neutrality on the other side. Nietzsche speaks of the, I think there's a poem by Keats about the all charms fly from the cold hand of philosophy, and Nietzsche also speaks of how ridiculous it would be to find, I think he says, delicate or polite hands on a cyclops. I think in Greek it's cyclops. Oh, we say cyclops. This idea of the philosophy as being, remembering that philosophy and science in general were, or knowledge in general, were always considered to be coincidental, to go together, until very recently, when the division was made between the highest ideas or values and the so-called objective sciences or objective knowledge, which really didn't take effect until about the year 1900, as we see in the history given in, as I mentioned before, in Arnold Brecht's book Political Theory, a masterly work. Yukoi makes some quite worthwhile comments about the difference that he feels are congenial to him by his natural inclinations, by his, let's say, Chinese-ness. For instance, that the Western feeling that the universal is something rather like the all or nothing Western thinking, that you have, as in Thomas, either sort of evil as the total absence of good, and good as the total presence of God. And the universal, Yukoi says, it's more congenial to him to think of it sort of in a more morphologically flexible way, universal, as though to say the scientific, I'm not quoting him exactly, and I think it's worthwhile to listen to the interview, but as though to say, in the West we have the idea of scientific generalization. You have some data and you generalize this kind of thing. It creates a very sharp sense of what a universal is, and then also the idea, which is not particularly spontaneously natural to the Chinese thinking, would be something in itself, a tree in itself, rather than alongside other things. It's not necessary to make these divisions in this way. But then the question would be here, I think, in connection to Dasein, whether the Vorhandenheit and Zuhandenheit, whether captivation and availability, whether being in the midst of things and then on the other hand holding back and allowing the possibility to come forward. This thinking, which Heidegger perhaps goes into very deeply in the investigation of Aristotle's, is it chapter 7? I can't remember. In the chapter where Aristotle deals with dunamis and energia, where dunamis means something like possibility and energia we usually take to mean actuality, but perhaps these terms could even be in some way thought in their most primordial way as the captivation and the presence or availability to um, the agent soul or nous, or the theorios, the one that holds it in their vision. Uh, yes, okay, many issues come through in this, some of them somewhat disturbing with regard to these accusations of Heidegger being a racist and Dugin's, I think, absurd claim that he's not a racist because uh, either if he's claiming to be genuinely a Russian, then doesn't he see things through a Russian lens, and then therefore doesn't he distort Heidegger, who he claims all Westerners are racist? Isn't that a distortion? So there's quite a bit of thinking here, which, if we handle it only on the basis of something like logic, we could be accused of imposing an acute Western lens onto other thinking, and then thereby encouraging the view that all Westerners are racist. But on the other hand, when it gets into more greater subtleties and things which we can't bring in strictly into presence, it does become rather disturbing. And then many difficulties come in, which I won't attempt to go into just now because of time limitations. It is very stimulating, and I think, although I am of the view that Dugin does not grasp Heidegger's thinking properly and transforms it into his anthropological conception of Dasein, he uses the same word and some of the meaning carries over. I don't think he sees Heidegger's claim in its fullness, because I'll try to manifest that more clearly in the next recording. It's something to do with, if Heidegger is saying he sees all human being, all Dasein, as between this, as the clearing, which is, let's say, the third moment between captivation and presence, which is at the same time might be thought, all three of them might be thought as being, as something which is neither captivation or presence. This is a claim out of the history of the West, and his claim is it only became visible because of the acuteness of the distinction which was made through the history of Western thinking, which brought us to this so-called Weltbild, this so-called this absolute sharpness of the conscious beholding of the available object, of the theory of the object before us, and the gradual intensification of Western thinking, even out of its daily common sense attitude towards theoretical thinking and away from captivation to complex conditions, and even including the morphing of the imaginative sensibility of Westerners towards these dunamis directions, these possibilities. The whole genius of the West is leading towards this, according to Heidegger. Therefore, you can see where, on the one hand, from Heidegger's view, everything, all the other Dasein are thought in this terms of this absorption on the one, captivation on the one hand, and presence on the other hand. But maybe this whole view isn't true to the history of other groups. But in that sense, what can Heidegger do? That's what he's in the midst of. He has no other choice. So to call him racist doesn't make any sense in that claim any more than Dugin would have to admit that he. I don't see how Dugin can avoid. Maybe it's possible, but it's very. He's claiming something that doesn't really make sense in any ordinary way. He's got a category. He categorizes all nations on the earth under his own schema. Imposes his schema of the uh, three parts of his schema: the logos part, uh, or the Apollonian, Dionysian, and the earth part, or however it's called. And he's got all this schema he imposes on all countries on the earth. How is he not doing a universal project, and how is he not doing it out of his supposed Orthodox consciousness or Russian consciousness? I've gone on too far on this one.